channel. And he said, in a nutshell, is MLB DFS essentially taking a stance on a couple pitchers and rotating good stacks throughout your lineups based on ownership? And essentially is the biggest advantage you can gain when it comes to building lineups is getting the correct pitchers in a given slate. I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think this is a common trend in DFS in general. And I think it comes from a world where optimizers don't account for the things that SaberSim does, like correlation and ownership and upside in the form of smart diversity, and requires users to enter a lot of rules and groups and stack types and things like that that we really just don't have to do here. That sports get boiled down to a few general statements of a heuristic, right? And this is one you'll hear, right? MLB DFS is best played by establishing a pitching pool and rotating your hitting stacks around it. Or for NBA, you know, these trends are similar. The optimal strategy is to lock in some value and rotate studs around them. You know, just various, I think every sport probably has one, various heuristics of just what somebody would do to simplify their DFS process using a traditional optimizer so that they could get lineups in time and not have to spend hours researching the slate intimately and be able to still build semi-successful lineups. But what is so cool about SaberSim is that we really don't have to do that. And we can start to look at the slate to slate variations and take advantage of what each slate presents to us on its own. And that's really what the nature of our test build is. We talk a lot about our content where we're talking about DFS process, about the value of running this test build. So if you haven't seen that before, really what a test build is you take settings that kind of fit generally what your contest might look like that night, and you run a build with default settings. I will typically update 2 projections very minorly just so I don't get that DK message. And we get an idea of just what the context of the slate looks like, right? And what you find if you run these over and over again and you play DFS often here is that the rules of the best way to play a certain sport fall apart really quickly because there's variance and there's variations in between each slate that by taking into account correlations, again, ownership and the upside of players, we can actually attack each slate differently, or at least provide SaberSim can provide an option of a different way to attack that is truly slate specific. So if we look at this right off the bat tonight, right, the conventional establish a pitching core and rotate your stacks around it isn't what SaberSim is recommending at first glance. Our most popular players are all Padres players who have, I think, the first 7 implied run total score of the year on both Vegas and SaberSim. And of 20 lineups, we're actually getting a 13 pitching core, 13 player pitching core, right? So quite a bit of a far cry away from the conventional establish a pitching core and rotate your stacks around them. That doesn't mean that you can't tighten up this. That's the point of step 3, right? Is that you could go in here and say, no, I want to play a tighter pitching core. Start chopping off some of the fat off the bottom here, which will allow us to tighten up at the top. And we've done this before, I think, on this stream here. But let's say we wanted to play a really tight pitching core and only play 4 pitchers. So let's go ahead and get to our top 4 pitchers. And we'll see what happens here. And you can still do this. We'll see. Okay, wait, let's see. Okay, so we have 4 pitchers. We've tightened up our pitching core. What will typically happen is we'll spread out our stacks a little bit more. San Diego's just projected so highly tonight that they're going to show up a lot, but you can still condense here a little bit. And that's fine. I'm going to reset this. But I guess really just the point that I really wanted to get across here is that the value of the test build is that we can get away from the conventional heuristics that you hear in the DFS space elsewhere, right? That this is the right way to build lineups for this kind of sport. We can handle that on a slate-to-slate basis with just a couple seconds of research, really. So we now have an idea, really, that the way SaberSim is approaching this slate here out of the box, default settings, is to play quite a bit of Padres, spread out a little bit to some other stacks, but you can see, especially on the 5 stacks, we're pretty condensed on Padres for 20 lineups and spread out at pitching. And that's not something that you could have really just established with a heuristic or a rule of thumb about how to play every slate. And that's true of every sport too, right? I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but you hear these sometimes. Or another one too, I guess, like even just staying on baseball, one I hear really often is that like you should always be paying up for that 10K pitcher. That's one that is like kind of conventional, that it always is worth paying up for the 10K pitcher, generally pairing him with some other value pitcher, and then you kind of fit in the bats that work around that. Again, that's the luxury we have here, is we don't have to think about these slates that way. Sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. Tonight, it doesn't make sense. Tonight, there's only one pitcher above 10K or even at 10K anyway. And that's Trevor Rogers. So not a great example, but that's, again, just something that we can avoid by having the luxury of an optimizer that thinks about these things. So Ruben, I don't know if you had a chance to tune in here. I think you had mentioned that you were going to watch it. If you have any questions or further thoughts about that, feel free to chime in or ask away. Again, I mentioned sometimes that the last thing I want to do here is take a question asked from somebody and kind of brush it away or answer it in a different way. And I feel like that's kind of what I've done again here. So I would say, like, the last note I'll say is I don't think there's anything wrong with your approach if that's the way you want to handle contests. It's like if you want to play a tight pitching pool and rotate stacks around, right? SaberSim just as easily allows you to do that. But I think the luxury of the test build and the product is that you don't have to, and you can handle that on a slate to slate basis, right?